I visited Nairobi, Kenya in early 2024, but I did not anticipate how my experience turned out. This video features 8 things I wish I knew before visiting Kenya. One of these tips will shock you and get you angry. Before we proceed, I feel the need to tell you that everything I'm saying here comes from a place of love. I know my experience wasn't perfect, so if there are certain things I mention here that you might not like, I think it might be time for introspection. Kenya has been on my wish list forever, and I kept pushing and pushing and pushing because of a couple reasons that were both within and outside my control. But after Lord knows how long, 2024 was finally the year I got to see the country that I've always wanted to see. I had a week to have the experience of a lifetime, but things went wrong from literally the first minute in the country. The journey was life-changing for both the right and wrong reasons, and over the next few minutes you would learn from my mistakes and ensure that you have a better experience than I did. The first thing I wished I knew before visiting Kenya was young Kenyans were unhappy. Oh my god. So I initially went to Kigali and Kampala before going to Nairobi on this same trip, and I had a layover at the Nairobi airport. I got to speak to a couple young Kenyans. They were also traveling, and while we were waiting for our individual flights, and everybody I spoke to, even if it wasn't a political conversation, it all went to politics and everybody was unhappy. There was a consensus of unease and unhappiness, and looking back now, I kind of knew the feeling because that was what a lot of young Nigerians felt before and during NSAS, but I did not think much of it because I didn't really know much of the local context. Now that the 2024 Kenyan protests have happened, looking back now, the picture is clearer. Like they always say, hindsight is 2020, and the unhappiness was very obvious, which was saddening to me. As always, shout out to the young Kenyans. I'm rooting for you. Secondly, international versus local pricing. I knew this before coming, but I could not wrap my head around it as at the time I had gotten there. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but locals and residents pay a certain price for most tourist traps, while internationals pay a different price. But the thing was, the price differences were incredible. I saw a place where it was, I think, about $2 for, like the equivalent of $2 for Kenyans and $100 for foreigners, and then I was like, wow. Once again, I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but I think there should be a middle ground for other African visitors, because these prices were obviously set with foreigners, Europeans and North Americans in mind, and I'm not earning euros or dollars, so I'm not saying we should be paying local prices, but there should be a third price for Africans because the prices were incredible. Love the fact that East African countries also pay local prices or close to local prices, and if you're a foreigner with a resident permit, you also pay local prices. If you are enjoying this video, please click the subscribe button and like. We are almost at 1,000, and just subscribe and help us get there. Thank you. The third thing I wish I knew before visiting Kenya was do not bring up uncomfortable conversations. Well, I did know that, but I'm just giving you the advice for when you want to go there. I know we are about to enter 2025 as at the time this video is launching, and the Kenyan protest is now in the past. As at the time I went, it was in the future. Kenya is a generally safe country, and they kind of have to maintain this status to continue attracting tourists with the big bucks. So they go the extra mile to ensure that the country is safe. But when you go in 2025 and beyond, try your best not to bring up the conversation of the protests. It is a sensitive topic for many, and the wounds have still not healed for many. But if a Kenyan brings up the conversation, you can always chime in and listen to them, but don't just go around asking, okay, how was the protest? What was it about? Blah 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 blah. Try to be empathetic and listen if you are spoken to. Next up, mobile money. I have a handful of Kenyan friends, and to say that M-Pesa is king in Kenya would be an understatement. The entire economy runs on it. If M-Pesa stops working for a day, I don't know what's gonna happen around the country, and a lot of Kenyans can never imagine that reality. The sheer scale of this ecosystem is ridiculous and wonderful at the same time. But to me and my little economic background, it seems a little scary for one company to control this large a chunk of a country's economy. I mean, that's just me. I'm not a big fan of monopolistic practices, but that's by the way. If you're going to be in Kenya for a while, you should get a SIM at the airport, and obviously you will register it the way you do in Nigeria with your passport and all. But I did not get a SIM when I went to Kenya Kenya, but M-Pesa is king. Keep that in mind. I remember I was heading to town on my own one time, and when we got to the location, I paid the Uber guy with cash, and he looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like, M-Pesa? I'm like, no. Another thing you definitely have to keep in mind before you travel is that, contrary to what the Kenyan government might want you to believe, Kenya is not visa free. My trip was originally supposed to be in December 2023, but it was around that time that the Kenyan president announced that Kenya was going to be visa free from this year. So I was like, you know what, why don't I just wait a couple more weeks and go there visa free? But alas, there's a visa. It's $30. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a visa, but why say there's no visa when there is? Kenya is not visa free. Don't book your tickets and get to the airport that day, because you will not be allowed. Like, always trying to book it at least a week before. It usually comes out in 48 to 72 hours, but you know how these things are. I remember at the Lagos airport, while I was trying to board my flight, a South African duo were not allowed to board because apparently that was like the week the whole visa free stuff started. And then they were like, South Africa has never had to pay for a visa, but now they need this new e-visa. Get a visa before you go. The next thing that we'll be talking about doesn't necessarily have to do with Kenya, but it kind of does. As a Nigerian traveling across Africa or the world, there are a lot of stereotypes that await you the moment you step off the plane. Many of them are negative, but there's no need for me to reinforce those stereotypes by mentioning them here, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But I've realized that in my time as a traveler, the positive stereotypes were worse. When somebody or most people learn that you are Nigerian, they always expect that you have money, and that to me has been worse than the negative stereotype, because at least if you think I'm trying to take your money, you would step clear, but people just imagine that you have money and then try to take it from you however way you can. So that's another thing that you have to contend with as a Nigerian traveling across Africa, with Kenya being in Africa. There are negative and positive stereotypes that are with you, so you might have to navigate around that. I remember in one country, they thought I was Ghanaian because it's a similar passport design, and then the moment you thought I was Nigerian, I was like, Nigerian, you have money, give me money. I was like, what? And this was at the airport, somebody working at the airport. To be Nigerian is to be judged before you are ever seen. Before we proceed, please kindly subscribe. We are trying to hit 1,000 subscribers before the end of the week. The next thing I'll talk about, it's a personal bias, but I feel like you can get better and more genuine experiences in Kenya and other African countries by trying to blend in. And a big part of trying to blend in as a black person in Africa is just keeping your mouth closed more often than not. Another thing that I saw that I had to deal with was, if you are going to be hanging out with a lot of intellectuals, like actual smart people in Kenya, you are going to turn into an encyclopedia. Kenyans have lots of questions to ask about Nigeria, especially things they see on TV, and I had to basically answer a lot of those questions, and a lot of these things I didn't even know. But if you are going to be hanging out with actual smart people, get ready to answer questions that you might have never been asked before about your country. Whipping out your phone in public to make a video, especially landscape style, can get you the wrong attentions. People might try to steal the phone, and there are rules against where you can video. Now, talking about videos, photos, and using your phone in public, I know you are in a new country, I might be feeling extra fancy and extra safe, but keep your phones close. I had spent a couple days in Kampala where I was inches away from losing my phone, so I was extra on edge during my time in Nairobi. But I have seen a lot of videos on the internet of people getting their phones snatched in Nairobi, and I'm not saying that your phone is gonna get snatched. I'm just saying keep an eye on it, hold it tighter, and just don't just bring it out anywhere. Doing this and more would ensure that you return back from Kenya with all the gadgets you went with. And as mentioned earlier, filming certain parts of the city and certain buildings can get you in trouble with the police, and worst case scenario, you have to answer a case. Best case scenario, they get money from you as a bribe. If you want to film discreetly, film from a certain position, but don't draw attention to yourself. Before we proceed, if you'd like to support the work I do here on this channel, then you should consider becoming a channel member or leaving a super thanks. It literally costs as little as $1. That's if you can and if you want to. Thank you very much. The next thing you should keep in mind is, do not go to Kenya by road. That's going to a neighboring country, spending time there, and then trying to cross from Tanzania or Uganda. My friends that had done it before advised me against it, but I ended up doing it, and it's a racket against Nigerians. When you go there, you get to pay a bribe. No matter the kind of visa you get there, they'll always tell you that it's wrong. If you have all the visas, they'll tell you that your yellow card shots are incomplete. No matter what you you do at these borders, you cannot win, and I had to pay $50 fine, $50 bribe actually. If Kenya is on your 2025 travel wish list, then you should get packing, because notwithstanding my experience in the country, I'm getting ready to revisit Kenya in 2025 and hopefully have a better experience. Until the next video, your friend from the Ukodo YouTube channel wishes you love, peace and prosperity.